Hello, good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? Are we doing well? Yes, well, I need some energy because it's about cycling, it's about traveling. So, thank you so much for the wonderful welcome greetings. And I would like all of you to join me to welcome Tim once more for accepting the invitation from the British Council and the collaboration with the Hong Kong Book Fair 2017. Thank you so much for coming to Hong Kong, and this is your first time, right?
It is. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Right, it's brilliant. Okay, so before we start anything, well, this is the first time I'm doing a moderation, so I could be quite rubbish at it. So don't laugh at me and give me any pressure. So I think you've got something to share with us in terms of video to share with us something you want to tell us about.
Well, I do, and I have to say that my son did say to me when I did this, he said, "Dad, it's too long. The attention span in the internet age is about 90 seconds, but I got so excited about making this YouTube video of my book here that it's a bit longer than that, so I'm sorry, we're going to instantly lose all the momentum we've painstakingly built up in the last few seconds." That's even assuming I know what happened there. See, I've already messed it up, Grace. Oh, there it is. I've got it now. I'm back in the game. So I didn't do that full screen. Is that full screen? I did all that myself, that little line and everything. Yeah, it was much too long. Sorry about that. It's such a stirring piece of music, the Soviet national anthem. It always brings a tear to my eye. I think the most amazing thing is I had one puncture on that entire ride. Isn't that ridiculous? One puncture. Anyway, now we can start all over again.
Great. Well, I want to set the tone a little bit for tonight's talk. Well, this year, the theme for the book fair is travel. And in Hong Kong, when we talk about travel writing, people refer to travel guide, and people would like to know where they go to eat and where to go to drink when they visit different countries. So in terms of travel writing, especially in the UK, there are a number of different schools of thinking, like what the UK travel writing is about. So one of them is the very traditional solo traveler exploring little known areas and of the planet and writing literary form or a non-fiction to document the experience. So we talked about earlier, and that before we came in, and like Bruce Chatwin and Rebecca West, the sort of writers, is very serious writing about their own experience. And then there's a newer school of travel writing that frame the journey on a very specific device. For example, in your case, it would be the bicycle, and how to make use of that and to frame the narrative, often a combination of sports, adventure, in some cases, misadventure, and travel, and to mix it all very refreshing, interesting experience. From your perspective, can you actually share with us a little bit more about what you see is the uniqueness of the UK travel writing, or what do you think is travel writing is about?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that obviously the writers you initially mentioned, they're what I would consider good writers, literary type writers, and they're able to. Well, I think there's two things. Most of those you're talking in historical terms. They're people who were kind of made a name for themselves some years ago, and I think at that time, because travel was not quite the universal experience it now is, there were still lots of places on the globe that you could go to, and it would be a completely new experience for people to read about. So when Bruce Chatwin went to Patagonia, nobody had ever really been there. And if you were a very good descriptive writer in the way that he was, you could just talk about the places you've been to, and it would be a new experience for people to read about it. I think these days, travel is much more possible. I mean, there's very few places that you can't get to, in most cases quite easily, which in many cases has sort of reduced the idea that you can just find new places to write about. So in a way, you've got to kind of go to places that maybe people are already familiar with and find a way of making it interesting to them. And I was personally delighted when Mr. Bill Bryson came onto the scene and started just going to fairly ordinary bed and breakfast hotels in England and going on trains in Sweden and writing about very everyman experiences that a lot of people certainly in my country had done, and writing about them in a funny way that sold loads of books, which opened the way for people like me to ride shamelessly on his coattails forever. Thank you, Mr. Bryson, for that.
Well, speaking of Mr. Bryson, I heard, I've never actually officially seen it, that he is he is a great fan of yours, and what the quote I get is that he is a great and long-standing admirer of your work.
Yeah,
so,
I've got that tattooed on my back, actually, if you want to see it later on.
Well, maybe next time.
That's not what you said just now.
So I think in a way that Mr. Bryson is kind of, would you say that he's paving the way for writers, emerging writers, to kind of enter that sort of writing, a new writing for it's a travelogue kind of writing for you guys?
I think he kind of, because he kind of demystified it in a way. It was just, you could, I mean, his books, when I was reading his first books, it sounded like somebody you knew who was really funny was just writing a very long postcard to you. It didn't seem like a great work of ambitious literature. So it did make, I guess, people like me think, I could have a go at doing something like that. And it kind of didn't make it seem such an awe-inspiring undertaking to go and write a travel book. I think, yeah, I mean, we're sort of at the point where, you know, you're taking the literature out of travel literature and just making it more of a sort of a comic travelogue. But it does always help, certainly helps me. And if I was as versatile as Bill Bryson, I would have gone off and written other books about other things. But I seem to have been locked into the going on a slightly over-ambitious journey and being ill-prepared for it and things going wrong and writing a book about it afterwards, which I don't mind. I'm happy to do that, to be honest. It's, yeah.
Fantastic. So before we talk about any of the specific books, probably the most recent one, can you tell us a little bit more about how you get into writing? Because from my research that I did recently, is that you it's quite extraordinary because you had different academic background before you entered writing, and you had some experience in the Oxford University, and then you had
very brief experience. That would be.
I'll let you tell more about it. And you have some other interesting work experience before you start diving into travel writing. Could you tell us more about it?
Yes. Well, I had a slightly, yeah. I mean, seeing as you brought it up, I went to Oxford for 2 terms to do modern history, but when the first thing they asked us to do was Aristotle, which seemed to me to be neither modern nor history, I kind of lost heart a bit at that stage. I think, as I said to you, I think I peaked intellectually when I was about 17, so I couldn't really make the next step up. I just found it too overwhelming. So I went and did a business studies degree at Sheffield University. There was an exciting moment about 10 years after I finished when my dad was doing something which I recognised as a spreadsheet and was able to apply my knowledge from university for the first and only time. But yeah, then I suppose I kind of, well, what actually, in fact, I do owe most things to my grandfather, who was a great traveller and a foreign correspondent for the Telegraph for years. He gave all of his grandchildren £3,000 when he was about 80, on the condition it had to be spent on travel. He said, if you're not going on a single journey, you can't have it. So actually, I think there were 7 grandchildren. I think my sister never got around to doing the journey, so she missed out there, sorry. But I said, okay, great. So I went off with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and this is 1990. And so the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain had just come down. I thought that'd be an interesting area to go and discover. So I bought this clapped-out old car, and we drove around it for 3 months, and on my grandfather's, money. And I came back, and this was the golden age of journalism. I can't quite believe this happened. I just thought I could write a funny story about my misadventures with this car going around these recently opened up countries, and I sent it off to the independent newspaper, and they said, yes, that's great. And they ran the entire thing, 2 pages, all my sort of crappy photos I took of the car breaking down in various places. And as I said, it was I can only assume it was because Bill Bryson had just sort of come onto the scene that after that one article, somebody from a publisher, HarperCollins, wrote to me and said, oh, we really like that story. Do you think you could write a book in that vein? I've got to say, it did take me about 7 years to get around to doing it after that. With one thing and another, having children and having to have responsible sources of income. But yeah, so it was kind of, I just fell into it in a really quite serendipitous, accidental way.
So would you say that travel writing chose you instead of the other way around?
I guess, well, maybe it did in a way. I mean, as I say, I hadn't really done any other. I'd done bits and pieces of freelance journalism. I started out doing music stuff, which was slightly ridiculous. I didn't really know anything about it. I'd be able to go and interview these bands who I'd never heard of, and more than once I'd be waiting in the record company office, and somebody would come in and I'd stand up and shake their hands, and they'd just come to change the photocopier toner and that sort of thing. That was quite a regular thing. So. I hadn't done any kind of first person type stuff at all until I did that thing about the Eastern Europe thing. So it was, I guess it must be sort of in the blood, because my grandfather did used to, even though he was a proper journalist who wrote kind of news type stories. I think he was the first Western journalist to go into Stalin's Russia, and he did a series of first-person articles about that, which we found after he died. Amazing, huge, great stories about him, sitting on trains in Soviet Russia in 1926 with a load of chicken farmers and stuff. And he did, when he went on his travels, I think when he was about 75, he drove his Land Rover all the way from his home in London, in Oxford, to India and back, which is way more hardcore than anything I've ever done or anything I ever will do. But he wrote us loads of really long, just funny first-person letters, which were always quite rude about all the places he'd been to and the people he'd met. So yeah, I've got him to thank for that probably.
And while I was reading some of your books, I wonder why the bicycle. What's the special attraction there? Why you chose that? Is it because your family all are very good bicycle riders and they're very professional? And why do you choose bicycle as a vehicle?
Well, yeah, my dad won the Tour de France 4 times. No, he didn't. And no, nobody in my family has ever had any interest in sport or anything like that of any sort. It was kind of an accident, really, when I was a student at Sheffield, doing a much easier degree than the one I'd given up on. So I had plenty of spare time, and there was the main job as a student is to watch afternoon quiz shows on TV. And after this particular afternoon quiz show called Countdown, which we used to watch religiously every day at 4:30, Channel 4 started showing the highlights of the Tour de France. And so just because I was too lazy to get up and change channels, I ended up watching a lot of the Tour de France and then got really into it. And when I came to do my first travel book, which was nothing to do with cycling at all, but they did involve some cycling, so I was retracing the journey of this sort of eccentric Victorian aristocrat, because my wife is from Iceland, and this guy was one of the first foreigners to write about Iceland. He went all around that part of the world and went around Iceland on a horse. So I thought, I'm not doing that, but the bits that he was going to do on a horse, I thought I'd do on a bicycle. So I ended up, because Iceland's a very, very lonely, remote place, which looks and feels a lot of it, and everyone lives around the edge. All the middle bit is like the surface of Mars, frankly. And you do go slightly mad when you're out there. So I ended up kind of having this internal commentary that I'd picked up from watching all these Tour de France races, and so I was like, this brave rider on a lone breakaway, and included this in the book, this great long sequence of me cycling across Iceland. And then another publisher said, actually, that sounds, so you're really into the Tour de France. Well, what about, I was looking for someone who's a sort of hapless idiot to go and try and tackle the entire route of the Tour de France. So kind of by mistake, I ended up doing this book. No, I don't have any, I've only got pictures of them. Anyway, sorry, there's no picture. I can suddenly flash up in a kind of interesting, seamless way and illustrate what I'm saying. A book called French Revolutions about me as a complete amateur trying to undertake this gigantic feat of human endurance, whilst going much, much more slowly, I have to say, than any real cyclist. And I think I just somehow accidentally tapped into this growing movement of generally men and generally of a certain age who were just really getting into the whole cycling thing, the whole middle-aged men in lycra phenomenon. And there were quite a few of these people, and somehow a number of them bought the book, and then after that, kind of just completely by accident, I became sort of shackled to the cycling thing. So I did, yeah. So there's always been a time when I go off and do other books, and then which maybe don't do all that well, and then my publisher will say, what about another book about cycling? Which I don't mind, because I still do find it. I think the bicycle is a very good way of kind of it instantly, because it's a universal skill that everyone, although apart from you, apparently Antony can't ride a bicycle. I'm afraid to say, everyone.
Sure.
Sorry, you started it with the Oxford thing, so. So it's kind of like this really humdrum ability that everyone has, that they can go off on a bicycle, and everyone knows what it's like to go up a big hill and get tired and then speed down the other side. So it's like there's this humble conveyance which is in everyone's garden, or maybe forgotten about at the shed, which they can go and get out and could, in theory, just cycle off and go on a great long adventure on, and that's kind of what I do. I don't do any kind of preparation. I must say I don't really do much cycling because I live in London, which is not probably slightly better suited to cycling than Hong Kong, but not very much better suited to it. So it's the not fun cycling in London. So I tend to go for 2 years without doing any cycling, or even 3 years, sometimes 5 years, and then going away and doing way too much cycling in quite extreme ways. But yeah, so it's kind of binary relationship I have doing it, like no cycling and then too much cycling. If I find a happy medium, it would be fine. I think that the good thing about doing it like that is that every time I go off and sit on a usually quite inappropriate bicycle, it's like I'm discovering it all over again. So it's. I mean, there also does come a point there, because I've now written 3 books about cycling. That was the most recent one. There was another one I did a few years ago about cycling. I should have had a better spread of pictures. It's completely my fault. Cycling the route of the 1914 Tour of Italy, which was the most terrible race in the history of cycling. So 81 people started it, only 8 people managed to finish it. And I thought, well, I'll retrace that route then, and I'll do it on a 1914 bicycle, which is what I did. Had wooden wheels and everything. So whenever I go out, it's almost like I'm rediscovering my it's like falling in love with the bicycle all over again, having forgotten about it. Although I have also slightly worried that after I've written 3 books that maybe there's only so many ways I can describe in a funny or entertaining manner the trials and tribulations of a slightly unfit middle-aged man going up a big hill. So I do have to have all 3 books open on Word documents and searching for things. Did I say that before? Yes. Oh shit, I did. So yeah. So I think that so at the moment I'm now thinking. Also, I'm just getting too old for it. Frankly, I can't believe I just did that last one, which was 2 years ago now, from a standing start in terms of my physical preparation, and I chose to do it on this ridiculous socialist era shopping bicycle with tiny, well, you've just seen it, tiny wheels and no gears and that sort of thing, which made my life really very difficult. And it took ages, and I thought I just can't get away with doing this again. Either I maintain myself in really tip-top physical shape, which I'm just too lazy to ever do, so that's not going to happen, or I try and just edge away again from the cycling until my publishers go and make me do it for the next time.
So apart from the physical preparation for the trip, I'm interested to find out what sort of research or preparation work that you need to do before you actually get into the writing itself.
Well, yeah, and I think in this particular case of this book, I was brought up as in the 60s, 70s, 80s with the shadow of the Cold War and the impending nuclear apocalypse that we're all going to die in and so on, other cheery thoughts like that. So I had a kind of vested interest. So I did know a bit about the history. I think there's always, even though I didn't last very long studying it at university, I think I've always been quite into history. So I do include that. I tend to kind of use a lot of I think if it was just me, riding along on my bike for day after day after day, people would probably get bored after 3 chapters. So I do try and put the history in there. But yes, that was obviously that's. I mean, the Tour de France was quite an easy one in a way because it's got a finite amount of stories and history about it, and you just have to read a few books about it and then pluck out the bits which are interesting and relevant and hope that no one's heard them before. But with the Cold War, A, it's obviously not very funny. B, it's like proper real history that you can't afford to get wrong. So I did have to read, by my standards, I did have to do some really proper, going to libraries type research and reading quite a lot of books. And then coming back and reading even more books and then trying to make it sort of interesting and entertaining, which is not something you would normally, certainly not the latter word you would ever use to describe that period of history. So yeah, it's quite, and you don't want to get too. You've got to try and thread it together. So you have to try and thread together quite incompatible themes, such as unfit man on bike and kind of big world-changing events of the 20th century. So yeah, that was quite tricky. I was quite glad to discover when I was in Finland, because Finland, no offence Finland, but Finland isn't terribly interesting. And because I started there, I had to think, like, what's good about that? That was why I started in the middle of winter, because I thought, and everyone said, why don't you start at the other end? You start in the Bulgarian end, because it was a really long route, and then arrive in Finland in summer, when you won't be freezing to death on a shopping bike, you idiot. And that would have been very sensible, but I thought, because it's so massive, it's about 1,700 kilometres of Finland. I thought, do I want the glorious narrative arc of my story to kind of reach this point, and then just me on a bike riding along through endless corridors of pine trees with lakes on either side at the end, or will that just really bore everyone to tears? So I thought, well, if I do it the other way around and do it in winter, that's a really interesting way of making Finland fascinating. And it certainly did. I did almost die in the process, I've got to say. It was absolutely terrifying. I've never been so scared in my entire life. When I put there, when I was writing it up, I put it near the end of Finland. I said, this was the most difficult thing I've ever, over the difficult 3 weeks of my entire life. And my editor, like when he sent the manuscript back, he scribbled like, really, question mark? Well, yes, actually, yes, it really was. I mean, every time I watch that video, I get kind of, PTSD, frankly. It's it's terrifying.
Well, it's a very challenging journey, but I'm sure along the way you must have met some interesting people, something that cheered you up. Could you share some of this with us?
Well, yeah, no, there was always. I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, generally speaking, on an individual level, people are good and they're nice and they're helpful, and even when they see a clearly unprepared man who's whatever he's undertaken is completely his own fault and he's been very irresponsible and shouldn't be doing it, when he is in need, they will help you out. And the Finns, who are, I mean, they're pretty lugubrious and not necessarily, their catchphrase was, if you need help, you will ask. And if you didn't ask, they would step over your frozen corpse. But if you did, they were great. They did it in a very sort of dour way. You would never, they're pretty unemotional people, but they were very, very practical and very, very good at helping you when you needed it. So I met some, I mean, that's the good thing about the good thing about being on a bicycle and not knowing what you're doing, and therefore getting into all sorts of situations, is you end up having to depend on other people. Therefore, you meet loads of people. So I stayed on a reindeer farm and met all these. There were some pictures lost in the morass of images there of me trying on all of their reindeer skin kind of lappish outfits and stuff. And I mean, there was always sometimes in Russia, I mean, the other thing I've discovered over the years is that, generally speaking, you kind of hope that people won't live up to their least flattering national stereotypes, but they really just do always. And people in Finland had said to me, like, when you go to Russia, when you will need help and you will ask, but they won't give it to you. And I wouldn't go that far, because they did help me out, but they were not. I think, in fairness to the Russians, I think the lesson of their history over the last few hundred years is that don't get involved in someone else's problem, because then it might become your problem as well. If maybe the police will say like, oh, hey, what are you doing helping this? What's happening here, or something? So they don't want to get involved, and I can understand that. There would always be about 2 or 3 guys, even outside of a tiny village, whose job appeared to be just to stand around in vests, just staring you out as you came into town. So it was a very strange atmosphere actually in Russia. But outside that, I mean, there were like Serbia, for instance, which I didn't know very much about, and had a bit of a slightly dodgy reputation as a slight pariah state, so on. But actually, they were great, and it was it was always nice to come home and people say, well, what was your discovery on that trip? Well, Serbia was my discovery, and really friendly people. You do feel like you are almost being like Bruce Chatwin or something, because you are going to places that other tourists have never been. You're discovering a new thing. No other visitors there really at all, and unbelievably cheap. So what more could you possibly want?
It sounds like to me that the more unprepared you are for the trip, the more interesting it gets. is it true? Because if you're over planning it, probably everything is kind of within your expectation, and you can't really find out anything that is adventurous, that is interesting to you. Is it a fair statement to make?
That would be a fair statement, and no one's ever accused me of being over-prepared for anything. There is, I've got to say, it's a slightly strange situation to be in. So you've got to kind of somehow find the happy medium between things going a bit wrong, which they kind of, you do need them to in a way, otherwise you haven't got any interesting stories to tell, and things just going way too wrong. And there were certainly times in Finland when I just thought this is too wrong. I've bitten off more than I can chew here. I'm not prepared for how bad this is going to be. Generally, because I always wonder when I go off on these sorts of things, what happens if after half an hour I fall off and break my arm or something? Well, that's going to be a really hilarious, 3-page short story, isn't it? So, so far I've got away with it. It's almost miraculous, frankly. I mean, I deserve to suffer some mission-ending disaster much more quickly than I've ever, and I never really have. But it is quite, so it's quite. I did it with the second book I did, actually. I was there's this thing called the Grand Tour, which in the 18th century all the English aristocrats decided to go and better themselves by going off around Europe to all the great capitals of Europe and Italy and so on, and coming back and cultured and better people. So I found out this guy who was appears to have been the first grand tourist, and he actually walked to Venice and back and wrote a book about it, which was quite entertaining book. But I thought, well, I'll mix the two things, so I'll get this old Rolls Royce and drive it to Venice and back, because it's bound to lead me into all sorts of hilarious, kind of situations with snotty French mechanics when it breaks down, and it just didn't break down at all. So I remember on the last few days, I was really kind of just like willing it to. I was kind of really kind of bursting with the accelerator and jamming the brakes on. And anyway, no, it didn't. It just didn't break down at all. I even sold it for a profit, which is remarkable. So, yeah, so it is quite strange going off on what nominally is like a holiday, where your kind of preparation list has to be, kind of quite deliberately quite short, because you can't be prepared for everything that might go wrong, because you have to have things that go wrong that you're not prepared for.
Yeah. Well, you've got some photographs on the screen. Do you want to kind of walk us through them?
The trouble is, we've actually just seen most of these, but only in really brief terms. So this is that's my first day in Finland, and it was just unbelievable. I mean, there was this. I think probably just about half an hour before I took this selfie, I saw a person, which was quite exciting because I hadn't seen anyone, and there was this old guy outside his house clearing the snow off his drive, wearing one of those hats with the big woolen ear caps, and he sort of he didn't really flag me down because I was going at walking pace really. He said, "You know how it is, the weather here?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why you are with bicycle?" And it was a question I was asking myself for the next 1,700 kilometres. I think I was just in disbelief. I think actually the reason I carried on going on these challenging weeks at the beginning there was because I literally couldn't believe what was happening. So it kind of somehow made it easier to deal with. I was able to just kind of, it was almost like an out-of-body experience, that it can't be happening to me. This is like a rolling nightmare. I mean, it was minus 22 degrees centigrade a couple of times. Yeah, Finland. I mean, there's various, as I say again, these cliches about every nation always end up being true. So I'd read a statistic that there are more saunas than cars in Finland, and it was true. Every single house or cabin, this was some sort of apartment I rented, had at least one, maybe two, sometimes three saunas, and this was the most memorable sauna I went in. You can't quite read it actually, but there was a little sign up here that said, "Please, no animals," up here somewhere, which I thought would have been quite a fun thing to have seen. That's my son. I think my wife was a bit worried. Not that I was. I mean, she's obviously over the years become quite blasé about these things, to an almost hurtful degree. In fact, she doesn't really. she doesn't really seem to care when I go off on these things. But I think, because I talked to her on the phone every couple of days, and I think she actually thought I was losing my mind. And I was, because I can verify this, because when I was younger and fitter and not doing things that were quite as stupid as this, I'd take a little notebook to write my notes, my thoughts about things but because I was wearing kind of like skiing gloves and stuff, that was not really going to happen. So I had a voice recorder thing on my phone, which was also a bit of a pain because I had to activate the touchscreen with my nose. It was the only exposed bit of my face. So I made, I don't know, something like 4,000 voice recordings. And in those early weeks, you can just hear me. You can hear me going mad. I'm just repeating myself endlessly. And just gibbering total rubbish and just like, singing things for ages. So she came out with my son. I think his main, I've got to say, it was just about to do his university finals, and I think he was slightly worryingly eager to be distracted from this plan. So yeah, they came out for about 3 or 4 days. The one good thing is my son said, "Oh yeah, I want to do. I'll ride along with you." So he borrowed off the Finnish Cycling Federation, who were very, very supportive and helped me out endlessly, actually, by finding reindeer farmers for me to go and sleep with. Anyway, but they got him a real bicycle. So he had a real bicycle with like loads of gears and stuff and proper size wheels. And as you see him, there he is in the full flush of his youthful fitness. And yet I destroyed him. I destroyed my son with my advanced cycling skills, just because I'd been doing loads of it by then. By the time he came out, and I was in much better shape than he was. And he only did it for a day, and then he just like, I don't want to do that anymore. And who can blame him? Because it was really, really quite grim at that stage. Nonetheless, it's a really funny and great book, which you should definitely buy. Yeah, there's still loads of these, monuments in the whole. This is in Russia. It's a bit worrying actually, because they were just coming up to the 70th anniversary of Victory Day when the Second World War was won, and Putin was really gearing up for this. So all of these monuments were being kind of buffed up and kind of repainted and in a way that kind of was slightly worrying. He was clearly he's trying to tap into the whole Soviet glory era, if not the politics. He's very keen on the idea of victory. This was a terrible mistake, this shirt. I thought it'd be a really fun sort of retro thing, really, in a way. So as I was going into East Germany, I should be. Anyway, before I left, I found this source of old East German cycling jerseys. I thought that'll be great. I'll really cut a dash there. So this is the first day I went into Germany, which would have been East Germany, and I put it on. You can't really quite see it there, but there's this symbol here is the Communist Party of East Germany's symbol. That was their national symbol. And I suppose because I've been trying to tell my kids about trying to instruct them in the whole thing with the Cold War and what it meant and how it cast a shadow over our lives and stuff. And they said, that was ages ago, Dad. And it just meant nothing to them at all. So I thought, okay, well, clearly I'm just really old, and it was a long time ago. And, it's just that no one's going to be offended or upset by this. But actually, it wasn't that long ago at all, really, was it? And so anyone under the age of 40 would have been brought up under this regime in which I think 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 people were Stasi informers. So they were, volunteered to the secret police to go and report on their neighbours and friends. So when I come in with a cheery reminder of this era, they're perhaps not going to be quite as entertained as I thought they might be. So after that first day, I had so many really, not just offended looks, but furiously angry looks. Luckily, the one thing I always take, because I'm not a very good mechanic on these things, is a load of gaffer tape to just patch things up when they go wrong. So I have to put on a big kind of cross of gaffer tape over the offending symbol, and then as I sweated up over the course of the day, it would slowly peel off. I just thought I'd share that lovely image with you there. But yeah, that was a huge error of judgment on my part. Anyway, then I go on and this was unfortunately I'm laughing here, which isn't great, is it? Because this is a preserved section of the actual Iron Curtain, the actual Berlin Wall thing between East and West Germany. There's a watchtower at the end there and everything. But I had my phone camera had a voice-activated shutter feature, which I just discovered actually, and well, there were 3 words which activated the shutter. Bizarrely, the first word is whiskey. I don't know why that should have done it, but the other 2 were capture and shoot. And it was a really windy day, and I really had to give it some oomph in the vocal department to activate the shutter. And this picture captures the moment when I realised that these weren't really the 2 words to be bellowing across no man's land. Because they're quite a lot. You can't. Anyway, there were quite a lot of old people walking their dogs and stuff right behind me there. But it was interesting actually, because this is a preserved bit of the wall. Generally speaking, there is no division, but you could always tell when you pass from West Germany into East Germany, partly just because things like, the road would be different. There'd be cobblestones and the houses look slightly kind of less well-to-do, but also because actually people were much friendlier when I crossed from the Old West into the Old East, which I was quite interested by. I might have thought it would have been the other way around, but I think they're still... Certainly, as I said, anyone over the age of 40 would have been brought up to have not had any strangers coming through their village. There wouldn't have been any outsiders because they wouldn't have been allowed. So just seeing a new face was something to celebrate. So they would give me a really kind of cheery welcome. And I thought that was interesting. Well, there's a Trabant. See, the bike I had was kind of a Trabant on 2 wheels. This was the car that was the default sort of Soviet era car, and mine was the 2-wheel version. They made 3 million of those bikes that I had, and 3 million Trabants. Although this bike was never intended to do anything more ambitious, as I discovered when I found these. You can find anything on the internet these days. These East German bike collectors, many of whom had been brought up in East Germany, and when I first described to them what I was intending to do, they really were very discouraging, I can say. And said, this little bicycle is only for going to the campsite shop and back with some bottle of beer in the basket. Do not attempt this. It will become a horror trip. That was my favourite catchphrase. Yeah, I'm not sure. I should really go back onto that forum and say, well, look, I did it. But it was very, very frustrating. It's only when you would occasionally get into races with people, as anyone who rides bikes ever, even though you say, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to go and be competitive, I'm not going to get into a race, but you always end up getting into races with people. And even by the end, when, as you can see, look at my glorious rippling muscles on my legs, I was in the form of my life at this point. But just because of the physics of the situation, having really small wheels and, I had 2 gears, but fundamentally even Lance Armstrong on every drug known to man wouldn't be able to beat a sort of an old lady on an actual bicycle, on that bicycle. Well, there we are. Yes, that's another Soviet-type monument. I think that's me at the end there. It's pretty bad the way my hair's gone grey at the sides there. It's just like I've got a huge sort of toupee stuck on the top of my head, isn't it? And here we are. This is, okay, now we're in a slightly jarring move forward. This is what I'm currently engaged in. Before I came out here yesterday, I was in Alabama. I'm currently driving across the United States of America in this 1924 Ford Model T. So it's quite strange to think that 3 days ago I was taking that picture. So I've left the car in a garage in Alabama. Well, some bloke's garage. Yeah, that guy there with his shirt off, I did a really kind of, well, I thought it was an interesting book about historical reenactment many years ago. I was clearly alone in that because it sold about 12 copies. But this guy I met him then because he was, he is the ultimate living historian. So he basically lives his life in the year 1774, give or take the odd pair of jeans. So I only visited him on proper historical reenactments. So I thought, well, I'll go and I realised I was going through Kentucky. I thought, oh, hang on, Jerry lives in Kentucky. So I got in touch with him, and he said, yeah, come over. So I went to see him on his farm, which was absolutely extraordinary. It was just like going into some sort of medieval peasants area. It was, completely disgusting, I suppose. Just extraordinary. And him and this is his sort of adopted son, and him and loads of goats and chickens, and his girlfriend were living in this sort of barefoot shack. He's just had a really serious operation. He's got a gigantic scar, and he's just had open heart surgery. This is really mean. I don't want him doing that. It's really mean. Anyway, so while I was there, the nurse came to check up on him, and this figure appeared at the door wearing this kind of complete kind of has-chem protection suit with a sort of face mask, full body plastic kind of scene of crime officer things, little plastic booties. She's clearly been to this place quite a lot, and this is just the standard outfit she wears. I thought, well, that must be really weird when seeing somebody at your door wearing all this outfit, knowing they're dressed like this because your place is so caked in filth. When she sat down on this sort of box thing, which she had as a chair, it was she put down this big sort of sterile plastic kind of wrapper thing and sat down on it really carefully. Having said that, he is the most impressive person I've ever met. So he knows more about any form of history than anyone I've ever met. He was in the special forces in Vietnam, working behind enemy lines, got all sorts of decorations. And when he got into the whole living history thing, he's written various doctorates in it as well. He's incredibly clever. So he did it. He said, well, I want to build everything. So he kind of made this own. I mean, it's funny because when I did this, I think the reason that book was so disastrous, most people think of reenactment as battle reenactment, so people who would go out and pretend and reenact some battle in the field and hit each other with sort of rubber, swords or something. But actually, I was really interested in the people who are obsessed with a particular period of history. And he was so into 1774, he said, okay, well, what would they have done? They would have made their own, I'm going to make my own ox cart. So he went and cut down trees and built a sort of blacksmith's forge and taught himself all these skills and made these entire buildings, including down to the very nails, and all of his own clothes and buttons and everything, out of just the stuff that was around him. I mean, if the Russians had bombed us into oblivion, I would have been happy to have been with him because he would have survived anything. Anyway, we can stare at that delighting image for some time now and then talk about something else.
So this is your most current project that you're working on, right? So is it possible to talk about a bit more about it, like what that actually entails, or is not appropriate to talk about it now?
It's completely appropriate.
Okay.
So what it was, I kind of, well, apart from finding something that wasn't a bicycle, when Donald Trump was elected, like a lot of people, I thought I knew America quite well. And when that happened, I thought, well, actually, I clearly didn't know it at all. It was almost like this country that everyone thought they understood was like this new country that did something quite inexplicable and therefore was a great mystery. So I thought I needed to go and find out this other America that I didn't know about. At the same time, it seemed like the Donald Trump election seems almost like the end of a period of American history. It was like, for 100 years pretty much they were absolutely the dominant force on earth, and everything they did turned to gold, and it was just, and now it seems like the American dream, which I guess lasted for about 100 years, seems to be coming to an end. And then I discovered off this eccentric German kind of cousin-in-law that there are quite a lot of Model T Fords still around. So I did my homework and found out that you could get one, and it seemed to me that this car was really represented the beginning of the American dream. And certainly, they made 15 million Model T Fords, and there are still 300,000 around, which is amazing. And it did. It started the whole, the industrial miracle and becoming a global economic superpower was all really started in really large part by this one vehicle there. And because Henry Ford, who obviously designed and, well, didn't really design it, but anyway, who marketed and produced this car, he was a farmer and he wanted to sell it to farmers to kind of open up their lives, economically and socially, because they were very isolated. They couldn't even have any friends because their friends are more than 30 miles away. You'd never get there on a horse and back before, it would be too. So this completely transformed their lives, and the connection to me seemed that the whole Donald Trump thing was a rural phenomenon. It's not a metropolitan thing. It's not, people in big cities. Nearly every big city in the US did not vote for Donald Trump. So it's the people in the more rural areas who kind of explained the Trump phenomenon. So in a slightly roundabout way, this seemed to be the ideal conveyance, this car that was pitched at farmers and rural communities. So my route is I'm going through all of the counties. I think there were 6,000 counties, all the ones with the highest Trump voting percentage. So it's not a straight line at all. In fact, rather than doing, I think, anyway, it could be about 2,500 miles if I was doing it in a straight line, but it's actually going to be about 6,000 miles the way I'm doing it. Yeah, so it's been incredibly interesting so far. But yeah, once again, because I'm a unprepared imbecile, I'm having to depend on people who know their stuff. So an awful lot of things have already gone wrong with this car, quite fundamental things, including large parts of the engine. And people have taken me under their wing and gone into their garages with me, and I pretended to help them while really just staring stupidly and holding a torch at what they're doing. And they've emerged with like gigantic bits of piston that have broken in half and stuff. But the car's still going so far, which is astounding.
So how far have you actually gone into this project? When do we expect to see what you come up with?
Well, publishing has got a very, very long sort of span. So there's a 2-year cycle in between books. And so it normally takes me it takes me about 6 or 7 months to write it up. So this will probably take me another. I've got to say, I hate saying this because so many things have gone wrong with this car. I still can't quite believe I will finish this, but just on the basis that somehow I have managed to finish the previous things, I have to assume that maybe I will. There's a chance I will do it. Therefore, I will write the book. Well, I better had write the book, otherwise my publishers want their money back. But yeah, so it's coming out in October 2018, which seems like a long time away. But in publishing terms, it's just next week.
Right. So before we go any further, I'd like to ask if there are any questions that you would like to ask before I ask him more questions. Hang on a minute, yeah.
We've got a roving microphone. Yes, we have.
I just wonder what the general sense is among the Trump supporters that you've met so far along the way. Are they regretting their decision, or are they still quite gung-ho about it?
Yeah, well, obviously, there's only I don't bring it up with everyone because I'm wary of getting assaulted, frankly, for being a sort of smart-ass limey. But the ones the ones I have talked. I mean, there's zero. I think they have so much invested in the Trump thing, and because also, as I've discovered, they've just projected their solutions to America onto this. He's almost like a blank canvas as far as they're concerned. As long as he just says "Make America Great Again," that's all they care about. They know, and they rode out so far. He's such an extreme thing to do that they can't, even as the evidence piles up, that he is a hopeless idiot. They can't, it's much easier for them at the moment to say, you know what, I'm completely wrong, and that was a really stupid thing to do. It's much easier for them to go along with him and say, oh yeah, well, it's a conspiracy by the media and so on. And I think the trouble is, unless he is really in the most categorical way possible seen to fail, they will always say, oh well, he could have done it if he'd had the chance, but they just didn't give him the chance to do it. So that sadly means we're going to have to put up with probably a full term of Donald Trump. Yeah. So no, I haven't so far met anyone who says, "Oh God, I really wish I hadn't done that." Not a single person.
Hi there. I think what you're doing right now actually makes really good television. So have you thought about doing a documentary or use more social media, or is it a really bad thing?
I should definitely use more social media, but I do Twitter, I've got to say, but I was kind of forced into that. I think I think there's a sort of terrible being too old and too lazy crossover for me to kind of go too much into the social media thing. But I mean, you are right. This would be a really, really interesting. It would be great. It would be great telly actually. But I'm rubbish at that kind of stuff. I did a book about the history of London seen through all the places on the Monopoly board. That's right. Well, in fact, I saw you holding one up in a video just earlier on today. And there was a TV thing based on that, which took about 13 years off my life and was awful. I couldn't. It was like I might be a bit better now. Actually, I was. Yeah, that scarred me. But it is a shame because it is. I can see that it would be in the hands of a competent presenter. It would actually be quite a fun thing to be doing. It would be quite watchable as well, and because it's quite photogenic, this car as well, isn't it? It's quite nice there. I'm amazed at how shiny it still is. I mean, I've been through some absolutely unbelievable weather, and it's still people like old farmers come up and try and buy it off me every day. Yeah, but I should. I don't even do Facebook or anything, but I do about I do quite a lot of tweeting when I'm going on these journeys, and then I don't do any tweeting between those bits.
Thank you. Tim, Antony, great conversation, thank you. Before Model T Fords and before East German shopping bikes, you did some expeditions on foot, one very long one with a very unusual companion, your trip in Spain with a donkey. Could you tell us about that? What stood out?
Yes, I did. That was, I mean, that was... In many ways, I mean, the trouble is, I suppose, because there's quite a long time in between these journeys, every time I start on one, I think, oh my God, this is the most difficult thing I've ever done. But I do remember on the first days with this donkey, because a machine is a machine, and a bicycle is a bicycle, and a car is a car, even if it's really old. But a really quite large animal is, it's. I mean, even there was only really in that it's quite a long walk. So I did this. There's this pilgrimage in northern Spain called the Camino de Santiago, which actually, if you look at the map, it's not very far. It's only 800 kilometers, 500 miles, something like that. But when you're trying to cajole this very large and famously reluctant animal to do that journey, it seems like quite a long time. In the last, I grew hugely fond of this animal. In the end, so my initial plan, I was going to get to the other end. I'd sketched out this hilarious last scene whereby I would kind of auction it to the highest bidder on the steps of the cathedral at the other end. But there was absolutely no way I could bear to. I just figured some chorizo manufacturer would make the highest bid or something like that. So I ended up paying a really very large sum to the man I bought him off to come and pick him up again and take him back to his nice donkey farm in the mountains. But yeah, that was quite something actually. That thing, and I did. It was it was interesting also because the kind of people that were also doing this thing. Because I was amazed that, and I can't quite believe this is true, but when I did all my research, this appears to be the case that back in the 14th century, 13th, 14th century, when people were coming from all over Europe to do this walk in gigantic numbers. Something like, I don't know, it's like about 5% of the British population or something claimed to have done it. I mean, I couldn't quite believe it. People who'd never ever, I mean, in those days, your radius of influence was about 3 miles. You stayed in the valley where you were born. You never moved out of it. But some extraordinary proportion of people in England appeared to have just transcended their normal boundaries in the most incredible fashion and just gone off and done this huge adventure. I think that was, in a way, why I thought it seemed like an appropriate thing to do with a kind of medieval beast of burden, although my initial plan was to ride the donkey. And I went down to this donkey sanctuary in Devon in England, which I discovered owns 3/4 of all the donkeys in England, because donkeys are not, I think that they have so much money because little old ladies who remember seeing donkeys being kind of whipped on the beaches of Weymouth and put down coal mines or something, still quite regularly give all of their money when they die to this donkey sanctuary. But there are no donkeys being maltreated in England, so they just keep buying all the ones that are and living them, and they're being sort of kept in this idyllic existence on this huge, they keep buying more and more acres of fields behind Sidmouth. So when I went there for my donkey awareness course, which seemed like a good idea, I've still got the certificate on my wall, actually.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a massive animal. I needed to, and there were, it needed stuff done to it. I was, I had to kind of clean crap out of its hooves every
I
day.
just didn't know that there's a course for it. I mean,
Well, I think also because these people have nothing else to do with their money. They have to, I did have to
Yeah.
pay for this course, but they had to justify their existence. And when I turned up there and said, and they said, "Oh, so why are you on the course?" I said, "Well, I'm going to ride a donkey across Spain." And they said, "Are you going to do what?" So I ride a donkey. I said, "No, you aren't. No." So the maximum humane payload for a donkey is 50 kilograms, apparently. And I said, "Well, tell that to Jesus." Because as far as I'm aware, I've regularly seen images of him happily riding on a donkey. But he was quite thin, wasn't he? So maybe he just scraped in under the line there. But yes, that was an extraordinary undertaking, actually. And but you do meet some strange people, because these days it's no longer really a religious thing. It's a sort of mobile therapist's couch for people who've had whose lives have taken a bit of a wrong turning. So either they had a messy divorce, or they were made redundant, or so that they're going in search of solutions. And quite often they imbue this whole walk with a great spiritual significance. So everything that happens on it and everyone they meet is something, it was meant to be. So I met some characters, some of whom would literally turn up unannounced on my doorstep 3 years later. But no, that was quite something. So thank you for reminding me to talk about that in a way that I completely failed to before.
so when you work on projects, I suppose you're attached to I would say the device, like the bicycle or the car or the donkey, emotionally. So by the end of the project, do you still feel emotionally attached to it so much that you can't part with it? Especially, for example, by the end of this project, would you be able to part with this car, and what are you going to do with it?
Well, I do. Well, apart from that, obviously the donkey wasn't really going to come home with me and live in my garden in London. I suppose it could have done. All the bicycles I've used, I ended up, on the East European one, the Iron Curtain one, I discovered the factory that made this bicycle was still making bicycles, which was quite extraordinary. I thought it would have been shut down, but there it was. And they invited me along, and it was really quite lovely. And they did all the local journalists turned up and did a little photo shoot with me and the managing director of this bike company. And then he wheeled up this new bike, and I'm sitting there shaking his hand in the local paper, and then I was thinking, what's this about? And then he said, "Yes, and now you take away your old bicycle, and you have a nice new bicycle to finish your journey." Oh, that's really kind, but that's not the point. But then he was completely, he couldn't. I think he literally thought I was doing it on that bike because I couldn't afford a better bike.
I can't imagine how bad that was.
Yeah, well, so. But he did say, even that once he'd picked himself up, he was crestfallen by my refusal. But he said, "Okay, well, I am building a new museum for bicycles, and I would be very interested in having your bicycle when you finish your ride." And I thought, "Wow, that's amazing!" But in the end, I haven't actually pursued that because I don't want to give it. Even though it would be really funny to go and see my bike in a museum, I still have an attachment to that. I have. I mean, okay, my 1914 bike is not a practical bike to ride about town, but the other one I ride it to my weekly badminton session every week. So
how many bikes do you have now?
I've got loads of bikes, actually, but that's partly, only 3 of them I have to have because they're souvenirs of previous rides. But part of the reason why, also with this Model T thing, people have sort of the Model T was designed for farmers to be able to have forever and treat appallingly, but be able to repair, and that was something that Henry Ford was very keen on. Henry Ford really hated throwing things away. He was very into recycling, getting maximum use out of stuff. These days, it seems that my bike's broken, people just throw them away and get new bikes. And so when my neighbours throw their bikes away, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, well, my girlfriend bought this bike and she doesn't really use it." I said, well, what's wrong with nothing? So I can't bear to decide. I end up hoarding all these bikes that people are throwing away as a completely pointless one-man protest against consumerism. So if you want a cheap bike, anyone, and you live in West London, I've got loads.
Great. Are there any more questions? Sure.
Oh, well, hang on, there's somebody else over there. Over there.
Is there anyone there?
Oh, you're just next to her over there. Oh.
Next. Yeah.
Okay. Super microphones. So you touched a little bit earlier on cycling in Hong Kong. Have you thought about cycling the mother of all cycling experiences, which is to cycle in China?
Well, yes, interesting you should say that, because of course that is the, when I said that the bike I rode around down the Iron Curtain, which they made 3 million of, I could say that was the most widely produced bike in history, but only if you exclude China, because all it's called a flying pigeon or something. Anyway, they've made like 7 million. I mean, and that would be interesting, because it seemed to me that 25 years ago, if you looked at any city in China, you'd see millions of bicycles everywhere. But in the space of one generation, that seems to have completely changed. And that's so it'd be quite nice to go and rediscover the place where cycling really was the universal form of transport for such a gigantic country, and go and. But it'd be a bit scary. I've never been to China, so I don't know about. I would have thought cycling in China might be a bit hairy. Yeah? No? Yeah, obviously. No, well, it would be. Yes, I have actually thought about that. If you've got any good routes, please suggest them.
Send him an email. Right. So, I want to take this conversation to a little different direction. You write you've been writing books for how many years? Like 10 years, 12 years?
Oh wait, well, no, God, it's.
This is your 10th, right? This is your 10th.
18 years, I think. Yeah.
Right. But in
more than that. Yeah.
In between books, you do go on holidays and you write articles for newspapers. So you have written for The Guardian, The Observer, and you've written for the BBC Lonely Planet magazine. So I just wonder, when you write for the newspapers and you write books, how different is it? Apart from the length of the article, of course. How different it is in terms of the experience for you?
Well, yes, it is. It's always been a bit different, but it's becoming more different because. When I was first doing, it would be about. I'd spend half my time doing travel journalism and half of my time doing books. These days, it's about 80% books, 20% journalism. Effectively, the internet has more or less killed travel journalism stone dead, really, just because everyone, I mean, obviously, everyone likes to imagine themselves. I mean, clearly, being a travel writer is a great job, it's a fantastic job, and anyone who goes on holiday likes to kind of imagine themselves doing a bit of it, and so the internet allows them to do it, and some of them are actually really good. So people now get used to the idea they can get free content, in that dread word, without having to, and obviously newspapers have been suffering anyway, but I used to do a lot of stuff for The Observer, and about 7 years ago they just sent me an email, oh yeah, we're just completely shutting our entire travel section, just gone, none of it. It's like, wow, yeah, we can't really get the advertising, etc. So there's much less of it, that's one thing. And also the other thing that seems to be happening quite a lot, which I find, back in the golden age, people would just say, just go to Western Australia and write 4,000 words. And now I think there's a tendency travel editors and so on, that they're trying to kind of mimic the stuff that you already get off the internet. So they want, give me, you go to Finland and 10 great ways to be a Finn, and then with sort of like 5 fun activities and 3 great Finnish foods to eat. It's all sort of bullet points, and there's no. Well, there's no first-person content really. That's just quite. I mean, in the case of Lonely Planet, they actually have this sort of guidelines, like never write in the first person. Do not include yourself in the story.
Why is that?
Again, I just think they want to they want to present these kind of slightly anodyne punchy facts and like 10 top tips, that kind of thing. But I think the mistake is, I mean, everyone can get that for free off the internet. So, to my mind, I just think they should be looking. I mean, I think people still buy books because they like to have a slightly more kind of expanded encounter with someone's experience. And I think people would engage more with a story about another country if it was a bit more of a sort of a personal take. That is just my opinion. The trouble is, of course, everything is focus grouped these days. And if you go to a focus group and say to them, okay, so there's what would you like if you were reading a story about Finland? What would you want? And if question one is like, some bloke's rambling story about Finland, you might go, what? All right. And number two, 10 top things like, yeah, that sounds great. And you would obviously, in a focus group environment, go for the bullet points. Which I think is misguided, but that's the way it's gone. So I find it quite difficult because I suppose because I spend so much of my time blathering on about myself and my stupid adventures that I find it quite hard to kind of tone that down and write in a sort of professional, responsible, punchy, brief way. I also do ramble on massively. My sentences are way too. When I occasionally do readings of things, and when I'm finally reading out my own words, I just. Half a page for a sentence. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry. It's just terrible. Really indisciplined. Anyway.
Do you read your own work quite frequently?
Yeah, I do it aloud every night for 4 hours before my delighted family. No. Actually, what's weird though is my children are really old. They're 23, 20, and 19. 21 and 19. They've never read any of my books at all. Which I'm not upset by this, but I just find it quite curious. So,
did you ask them why?
No, because that would sound pathetic.
No, wow.
Why? I mean, they're in it and everything. Almost at least every time they're always mentioned in it. They're kind of they're supporting characters. But anyway, so maybe they're probably taking their lead from me because I don't tend to go back and. So people often ask me, say, do you laugh at the things you write? Actually, I do a bit sometimes. Really, occasionally, I do. But I don't tend. I do find it somehow awkward to go back and so when I do read some of the things that as I say, when I'm doing the cycling ones, I mentioned the fact that I have to have all three open on Word documents to make sure I'm not repeating myself from previous books. And I'm looking back at some of it, thinking, God, It does all come back to you when you read it, but it's I still almost like I'm reading something that somebody else has written. I think I get so in the zone when I'm on a new adventure. Everything else that I've done before gets blotted out. It seems to be like I have to concentrate so much on this developing new story. It becomes kind of all-encompassing, and everything else kind of just fades away permanently into the background.
Right. It's a very practical question. Well, you've written so many books, and actually, before you start writing it, do you always get a publisher's contract before you start writing it, or you just go ahead and write it anyway, and then see what your luck is going to lead you to?
I always get a contract. I think just even though it does seem like probably the most self-indulgent career possible, nonetheless I do have a family, and it would be too self-indulgent to go off for 3 months on some ridiculous adventure if there wasn't even a guarantee that I would make any money out of it at all, and I would just instead spend loads of money. So what happens is I will. I must say it's a bit annoying in some ways. I've been with the same publisher for years and years and years, but I still have to, just because you have to write a proposal. And I said, well, it's this, you know what I'm going to do. It's just me and a ridiculous old car driving across America through Trump land. Come on. Anyway, but no, I have to write a sort of structured proposal. I suppose it's fair enough, because they have to go to meetings and say, this is then they will say, no, do another book about cycling sometimes. Or they will say, okay, that sounds good. And then they'll give you an amount of money which is paid to you in installments. So that's just up front. So, because people often ask me also, do you get any expenses from your publishers? No. So it's always in my interest to spend as little as possible on any particular trip. So I've blown the budget totally on this car, which costs $14,000. But if I ship it back, I can apparently sell it for more than that in England. So all is not lost. until I set fire to it or it gets impounded by the police or something.
Right. Well, so I think we've got about 5 minutes left.
I can do that dance I was going to do then.
Please don't. Do you have anybody, or is there anybody who want to ask the question? If not, I'm going to, this one, please.
Hi. I feel I have to ask about Brexit, especially after you spoke about your project about Donald Trump, about traveling in the US in the age of Trump. So I was wondering, in the age of Brexit, what are the implications for you as a travel writer, or what are the implications for travel literature in the UK?
Yes, it is. There certainly are parallels with the Trump thing. I think one of my cousins, who's from Detroit actually, who I hadn't seen for about 20 years, he came over last summer just after the Brexit vote, and more or less the first thing he said to me was like, wow, you guys must be so pumped for Brexit, because and I personally thought it was a complete disaster. I'm still really, really embarrassed and ashamed and distraught at the entire thing. I think it's because I have generally, most of my books have been, European based. I've done an awful lot of stuff in Europe, and I do feel very European, and I can't believe that we've just cut ourselves off like this. It's ridiculous. It may be in the end, and it's all being debated and will endlessly be forever, whether, to the extent of how hard a Brexit is going to be, and it may just be on a very mundane level. I'll have to go into an even more isolated queue at the customs and spend a bit longer than other people than I already do. I just think it's a very big backward step. I can't really see any. It doesn't. I mean, in the same way that Trump it seems an illogical position that it's just based on some emotive factors that people have sort of sublimated all of their grievances and woes onto one almost random issue, that just because it's a rejection of some status quo they're not dissatisfied with, that seems to have been the reason people that when you actually try and pin people down on what their supposed benefits are, they can't really ever come up with any, because there aren't any. Luckily, I'm quite old, so it probably won't affect me and my travel writing career too much, I suppose, is the short answer. But it will be, it's interesting, I suppose. It's that's the best thing you can say about it.
Great. Okay, I'm going to close this with the very last question.
This guy's got a great sign with the countdown in minutes on them over there.
Right. Yeah, that catches my eye too. I always want to ask this question to everybody I talk to when I do interviews. If you were not a travel writer, what do you think you would have been today? My dad really wanted me to do advertising copywriting. I think I always like to think, when I was doing this Cold War trip, I did wonder what the kind of, what would I have done in these regimes if I'd been forced to do something? And I do, my default position, I would quite like to have done some propaganda. I think I could have done an all right job at that. And advertising copywriting is essentially propaganda, isn't it? So, maybe discuss that later.
Yeah. So I suppose I've always done something to do with writing. So it probably would have been something like that. There's loads of things I can never imagine doing in a million. My wife is a teacher. I couldn't do that for 5 seconds. That's just there's almost I can't actually think of anything else I'm remotely qualified to do. I'm just every time I think about my business studies degree, I'm just so relieved that somehow by some horrible set of circumstances I didn't end up in a position where I'll be using that on a daily basis.
Great. On that note, thank you very much, and thank you so much everybody for coming tonight. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you for coming.